Alrighty, so welcome to week 5. We're cruising right along of Cycle, Synch, and Chisel. This week we are going to be diving into blood sugar regulation. There's quite a few bits to this, but here's a little summary. So we are just going to name it, define it. What is blood sugar management? What does that mean? We're going to identify what kind of burner you are. So there's fast burners, slow burners. So we'll kind of pinpoint that and maybe help give you a better idea of where you fall on the spectrum there. We're going to talk about hypoglycemia and its effects. So low blood sugar and why we don't want that. We don't want high blood sugar. We don't want low. But I think it's very, very important to talk about hypoglycemia, especially for athletes, especially endurance athletes, as when you bonk, it's usually a case of that, right? So we want to kind of fully understand that and try to better prepare ourselves so that that doesn't happen. We'll talk about the relationship of blood sugar to your heart, why that's very, very important. And then we'll finally go over like basically how to manage your blood sugar. In our lecture last week, I talked about Elisa's kind of like motto of every meal every day. And this is a part where that definitely comes into play, and we'll kind of get into the details there. So when we talk about hormonal issues, the number one reason that they exist is because of blood sugar. If we could regulate our blood sugar, a lot of our ups and downs, a lot of our hormonal issues would not be present. And as a reminder, when one part of the endocrine system is affected, other parts are affected because it all wants to create homeostasis, right? So if one piece isn't able to do its like entitled duty, another aspect of the endocrine system is going to step away from its duties in order to try to like make up for that, right? So it's a full circle thing, and we want to try to find as even of a playing field as we can. One of the main functions of your endocrine system is to bring glucose to your heart, to your brain, and to other muscles, your heart being a muscle. So, other muscles for when we just move and go about our day-to-day lives. If there's any issue with the delivery of glucose, that is going to lead to mismanaged blood sugar, right? It's going to just like have a cascade effect. How common is mismanaged blood sugar? Super. Elisa, in her book, Woman Code, states that she's not yet had one woman walk into her clinic that did not have mismanaged blood sugar, right? So it's super, super common. Very, very common. And I would say it's also very, very common in our modern day society where like convenience food is everywhere. We are asked to work pretty insane hours. So we grab and go, or we just miss a meal because there's a meeting, and then there's kids, and then there's, your training. And so it's just so common. So don't think that you're a bad person if you have mismanaged blood sugar. Pretty much all of us do. And this is, again, just a chance to build awareness. So what exactly is blood sugar management? It's going to require monitoring and responding to your body's glucose levels. And you've got to take steps to keep it balanced. So when it's out of whack, we all kind of know the sensation, but hopefully at some point we learn to be in regulation a little bit more frequently. But when we know that we've either overconsumed or we've missed a meal, and now we're going to basically go into like a hypoglycemic episode, we have the knowledge to know how to fix that, how to remedy that, right? How to pull ourselves out of that so that we don't repeat the cycle, okay? It also comes down to educating ourselves in knowing the pairing of foods, the timing of foods, proper sources of, say, complex carbohydrates, the time and place to incorporate those. If you're a fast burner or a slow burner, how many carbs should you be getting? When should you be eating your carbs, right? So educating ourselves, hopefully we get at least a smidgen of that from this discussion, educating ourselves that, again, we can have empowered, informed decisions about what is coming into our body every meal, every day, right? To help us balance our blood sugar. So let's just quickly talk about high and low blood sugar. Higher levels are going to lead to insulin resistance and diabetes. Does that happen from one episode? No. But if you have chronically high levels, then yes, these things are more likely to happen. Low levels lead to irritability, mood swings, hangriness. I think we've all been there. It's not a good place to be. And then you usually overeating cycles, right? You're so ravenous that you overindulge. Really not intentionally. It's just like you just can't stop it. You're just so hungry. You just keep eating, right? When we do that, or just in general, when we have low levels, this is forcing our liver to do work that it otherwise wouldn't have, right? It wouldn't have to be doing. It could be doing other things, right? And again, it's the cyclical effect of like, if one part of the endocrine system is kind of distracted and has to take over a different role, it can't fully fulfill its normal role, right? And we want our liver to be functioning as well as it can be with detoxification, right? We want it to be helping us with estrogen metabolism. And so when it, needs to do other duties, we are affecting the whole entire system and our hormones and our cycle and how we show up and all of the things. So say you eat too many carbs at a meal, and we're going to specifically speak on carbs because they're going to have the quickest response to your system, right? They're going to have the, let's say, quickest impact on your system. If you say you overindulge, get outside, go for a walk, climb your stairs, even just for like, you could do a 10-minute walk. If you're climbing stairs, do 10 flights of stairs, do some form of activity, because what that's going to do is help use up some of the glucose. Okay. It's a quick fix. It's not, it's really not a long-term solution. We've got to examine what's happening prior to that. Why did the why did the overeating happen? Was it because you waited too long for the meal? Was it because it was just so yummy and these things sometimes happen? Was it because you had gotten hangry, right? Were you in a hypoglycemic episode, a hypoglycemic state that caused you to overeat? If so, that's something we can fix. I would say that you can't, sometimes it's just really nice to overeat something that tastes so good, right? So I'm not talking about that, but if it's something that we can prevent in terms of like hypoglycemic episodes, we would like to do that, okay? And this is kind of a reiteration, but exercise and movement are natural ways to reduce the glucose load on your body. Just by moving our bodies, we can prevent severe spikes and therefore severe dips. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But, if your blood glucose skyrockets, it's going to plummet. It's just what it does. And we'll talk about the reason why it does that. But again, if you can just move, you can reduce how much it skyrockets, and therefore you can reduce how much it plummets. I'm not saying you're going to be able to totally, eliminate that, but you can definitely have an impact just by moving for a little bit. So this chart right here, this dotted line would be perfect blood sugar. Absolutely perfect. This right here is after you eat a meal, which truthfully is like, it's normal. Even if you eat an apple is going to spike your blood sugar, right? So it's virtually impossible. I'm sure there's somebody who's done it, but for us who don't have all the gadgets and are just really trying to do our best, it would be pretty damn impossible to maintain homeostasis, to have a completely level line of blood sugar all day long. You will naturally have, let's say, like a rise and a slight dip. We would like to avoid peaks and valleys. Okay, we want to have those be as like moderate as possible. Okay, and our goal here is to keep the rise in blood sugar as reasonable as we can, knowing that even in this, right, see, it goes down, it just dips a little bit, right? At some point it comes down and then it goes back to homeostasis. So we just want to have as reasonable of a rise as possible. So some of us think, oh, wow, so simple. I'll just cut out all forms of sugar and carbs, and then I'll be in control of my blood sugar levels. And we definitely don't want to do that. Number one reason is because glucose is our brain's primary source of fuel. If we don't consume sources of glucose, we will not be as sharp. We will not be able to retain information. We will be super foggy. We'll most likely be irritable. I will say that there are, like when you think of a ketogenic diet, and what comes to mind for me is the use of ketogenic, let's say this, the use of keto to treat, say, epilepsy. I feel like that is a scientific proven way to help reduce the amount of seizures that somebody with epilepsy has. I do think that you can, like it's classic when somebody starts a keto diet, they have like a 2 to 3 week window of brain fog before their body switches over into ketosis, which then your body is running on a totally different fuel system. So if we're not talking about being keto or going into ketosis, our brain's chosen primary source of fuel is glucose. Okay. Again, there's going to be like outliers that choose to pursue keto, that it works for them for whatever reasons. That's fine, as long as, like, are you being true with yourself? Do you still, like, did the fogginess really leave? Are you able to retain information? Are your moods stable? All of those things, right? Always checking in, like, is that dietary choice supporting you or making life harder, right? Something to always consider. Our bodies perceive mismanaged blood sugar as a stressor. And so when our body's under stress, what happens? Fight or flight, adrenals release cortisol and adrenaline, okay? Again, most of us are in a chronic state of fight or flight. So if we add to that by missing meals, again, we're just doubling down on the amount of cortisol and adrenaline. What we know about cortisol is that cortisol actually, in unhealthy, higher doses, actually causes the body to store fat. We definitely don't want that. We don't. Normal levels of cortisol help the body to burn fat. Interesting, right? So stress management is huge, as is making sure that you are fed. Okay. When we're eating in an informed, conscious manner, we have that much better of a chance at managing our blood sugar and keeping it as close to stasis as possible. So, right, keeping it as close to that flat line. This is, again, where every meal every day comes into the picture. At every single meal, we have a choice to make a conscious choice, a conscious decision about what we are going to consume. I feel like I am almost always conscious, and then there are times where I'm like, fuck, I didn't realize how that was going to affect me. And I'm learning more and more based on like where I am in my cycle, that if, say, I eat a carb heavy meal, I'm also learning that I am a slow burner. So if I eat a carb heavy meal, I'm going to crash. I might feel good for a little bit, but I will inevitably crash, right? And then that's going to start this like cycle of I crashed and now I want to eat. And then like blood sugar rises again, then it falls, and all of these things. All that to say, you can be conscious and you can be aware, and sometimes you're still going to not make mistakes, but we're learning, right? So we're learning along the way. I try to take those moments as teachers and examples. I try to step back and reflect once I'm fed of like, okay, what could I have done differently here? Back in the day, I would have destroyed myself mentally. I would have been like, the onslaught of self-criticism would have been real thick, real deep, real heavy. These days, I try to meet myself with compassion of like, okay, cool. So here we are, we're eating again. You know, this is happening because your blood sugar is kind of going all over the place. So backtrack. What did you do today? What have you consumed? How could you have made like some change that would have affected this differently? Okay. Something else we need to consider is our epigenetic response. So your habits will trigger a hormonal response that results in symptoms based on your DNA. It's pretty wild. But again, like say, okay, so I'm Irish and my great grandfather was evacuated from the Blasket Islands because of the potato famine, right? This is probably why I'm a slow burner, truthfully. My family line had to hold on to what they could for as long as they could. And this is real stuff. This is like actually true. It's kind of a wild thing to think about, but it's true. And this is where we kind of go into, are we fast burner or slow burner, right? Maybe that wouldn't have been my case if that wasn't my genetic line, right? But these are things, epigenetics do play a role in how we metabolize things. Again, here we go. Are you a fast burner or a slow burner? This could also be referred to as fast metabolism or slow metabolism, which I know for most of us, like we've had those conversations. And just to kind of break it down, like metabolism is the chemical process by which your body converts what you're consuming into energy. The calories in the foods that you're consuming are combined with oxygen, and that's going to release energy. And that's what your body is running on. Obviously, there's a whole plethora of other processes that happen in order to get energy into the cells, but like that's your metabolism, right? So it's the breaking down of what you eat to create calories or to create energy. Calories and energy are the same thing. When we think of fast burners and slow burners, we're all breaking down food the same exact way. The difference is the efficiency in which those two types of burners do so, okay? The process of breaking down food is exactly the same. It's just the efficiency, okay? So with fast burners, the body moves glucose into the cells rapidly and immediately uses that glucose when needed for energy. It can just quickly access it, okay? There's like very little effort required to get that glucose back out for energy. You can temporarily, say you're not a fast burner, you can temporarily become a fast burner if you say are exposed to cold temps. So if you start freezing or shivering, I should say, that's going to speed up your metabolism. And another time would be if you're suffering from any illness or an infection. So the immune response will speed up your system, okay? Slow burners have compromised insulin receptors, which means glucose stays in the bloodstream longer before going into your cells. Again, so if you're a slow burner, your blood sugar is going to rise. It's going to stay elevated for a little bit longer. Crash. The retrieval of glucose requires more energy. So with fast burners, again, the moment the body needs glucose, it's like, boom, pulls it right out of the cell. With slow burners, there's like a longer process. You can't access that energy right away, or sorry, you can't access that glucose right away. We talked about cortisol briefly a few slides ago, but cortisol and stress, or I should say excess cortisol and stress, can slow you down, right? So again, even more motivation to stay on top of your stress load. We want to try to really regulate our nervous systems because those can also lead to elevated insulin levels as well. This is not my chart. I did not make this, but I did find it helpful, so I wanted to pull it on over. Again, you'll get this in an email as a PDF. So if you want to like, pull it up closer or whatever later on, you can. But this is a really helpful chart of like, what do you identify with on either side, fast versus slow. I will say, like, as again, I've identified myself as a slow burner. I identify with some things that are on the fast side, but a majority of the slow side is like, I'm like, yep, no, that's me. That's something that comes up for me often, more on the slow side than on the fast. So that's how I would use that chart. Whatever side you are predominantly finding yeses, you're most likely that type of burner. And we can't change what kind of burner we are. We can't, but we can choose foods that support us, right? That's the important piece. Just because you're a slow burner doesn't mean it's not a bad thing. And in fact, fast burners are more likely to have hypoglycemic episodes. And so for me, I know that anytime I've experienced a hypoglycemic episode, I then binge. So I see that as like, oh, maybe I'm really glad that I'm not a fast burner. Do I wish I could eat all the pastries and not be ill affected by it? Yes, of course. But the wonderful thing about aging is I get more and more okay with less pastries. So um yeah, so why do you want to know what kind of burner you are? It's because it can help you determine like how many complex carbs you can be having at a meal. um we're talking specifically about complex carbohydrates. None of this is in relation to simple carbs. So simple carbs could be sugar, candy, pastries. I would imagine that like wine is very much so a simple carb. Um, we're not speaking on simple carbs. We are specifically talking about complex carbs. We'll go over some examples of what complex carbs are in a little bit. But to break it down, slow burners will need fewer complex carbs. And that's again because the glucose is going to stick around longer in the bloodstream. Okay. Fast burners, you're going to need a little bit more because they so efficiently utilize glucose that their risk of a hypoglycemic episode is quite high, right? So fast burners are going to need more carbohydrates, specifically complex carbohydrates. I did already talk about this, but you can't change what kind of burner you are in general. Stress, sickness, infection, we talked about, can change your metabolism temporarily, but the moment you recover, you'll go back to what your foundation was. I will say that in a possible way of changing your metabolism, say you were slow, you will speed it up a little bit. Nothing like astronomical, but will definitely speed it up by creating more lean body mass. Okay. The more muscle you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate will become, right? So that's, again, your BMR. That is the amount of calories your body needs at rest in order for you to just pump your heart, just to breathe, right? So by building lean body mass, you can have a small effect on your metabolism. I encourage you highly to build as much lean body mass as you can, because as we get older, that becomes harder and harder. We want to build bone density. We want to be strong as fuck. We want to be able to take a fall in the hip when we're 60, when we're 70, and not break in half, right? We want to be able to like live an empowered life for sure. Very, very, very much so. Very much so. Okay. Let's go down the path of hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia is simply low blood sugar. It's when you drop way too low. Okay. This can occur for two reasons that I know of. It can occur if you're eating like not enough food, right? And I don't think a lot of us intentionally are not eating enough food. I think we just get so caught up in our days that we unintentionally miss a meal, or we unintentionally work through lunch, or drive here or there without a meal, or we get to a restaurant and we're starving, right? These things, like, again, if we build awareness, have a little bit more consciousness about kind of like the timing of our meals, we can fix this. The other reason that hypoglycemia can happen is overconsumption or overindulging. Again, a massive spike is going to lead to a massive dip. Okay. Let's talk about like why that happens. Why does the dip happen? So your pancreas is going to send out insulin to help bring blood sugar back down by taking the sugars as glucose to your cells. Usually, if we overconsume, too much insulin is released, which leads to too much glucose going to your cells and not enough being around in your blood, hence low blood sugar. Okay. So again, you overeat, too much insulin ends up being released. So too much glucose is drawn into the cells. And then not enough is free floating in the blood. This is kind of the cliff notes of what happens. I try to break it down so that it's like nice and easy, but here we go. You eat too many carbs, too much insulin is released, cells take up too much glucose, blood sugar drops, and then here's the kicker. You then get hungry. Your body thinks you're starving because your blood sugar is too low. So it sends out, we'll talk about this in a second, it sends out a hormone to make you hungry, even though you just ate. It's literally like Elisa talks about willpower. Like there's really no willpower that you can have to trump this, to beat this. your body literally is telling you, you're starving, I need to eat. Okay. And here's the other kicker about it. It's usually like, I'll speak from personal experience. It's like you had a big bowl of pasta, or I've had, I always use the ice cream example, but I had a beautiful, lovely bowl of ice cream, right? And like 30 minutes go by and I'm like, I finish it and I'm like, oh boy, I don't feel so good. And then 30 minutes go by and I'm like, oh, actually, I might go get some nuts. I feel like I need something more. And it's like, what? I probably just had like 2,000 calories in that bowl of ice cream, you know? And then you get in your head of like, why am I hungry? Am I all these things, right? So it's kind of out of your control if you do eat too many carbs. Like this cycle will happen. Okay. I would say it doesn't, I don't know off the top of my head the scientific response, say you eat too much protein or if you eat too much fat, but I know like from my own experience, I might slow down. I might feel like a little sluggish as my body digests that, but it definitely does not, there is no desire after that to eat more. I'm very satisfied. So I know for sure this right here absolutely applies to me. I've lived this so many times. This is just a little bit more detail about the hypoglycemic state and how it cues the body that you are starving. This is where the hunger hormone ghrelin is released, again, because the body thinks you're starving. So it releases ghrelin, which signals you to eat. That's where you get the rumble in your tummy. And again, literally sitting there with a distended belly post ice cream bowl. And I get that sensation. And I'm like, how? You like talk to your stomach. You're like, how are you hungry? How? And it's out of your control. It's really just simply out of your control. An interesting study is just ask yourself, like, are you prone to sugar cravings? I know that I am. So it's most likely in my genetic disposition to probably ultimately one day get like slightly overweight and whatnot. But this study found that when we have low blood sugar, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that it's responsible for controlling impulse, basically becomes inactive. The moment you elevate blood sugar or bring it back to normal, the prefrontal cortex does become active again. So that's really interesting. So if you are prone to sugar cravings, let's say this, the willpower piece, I had the ice cream, I'm all of a sudden hungry again. The smart choice would be to eat protein, to kind of try to cut the cycle, eat protein, get outside, move my body, something like that. If my prefrontal cortex is not helping me out by trying to control impulse and I'm prone to sugar cravings, I'm most likely just going to reach for more sugar, right? So that's the interesting piece about this study. Then you have people also like me who have like so addicts, any family line of addiction, their prefrontal cortex is most likely also not firing all the time the way that it should be. It's not optimally firing. People with addiction tend to have I don't want to say non-existent prefrontal cortex, but there's part of the reason why addiction can happen. I'm saying there's many reasons, but part of the reason it can happen is because there is no like negotiation in the mind of like, oh, the consequence of if I do this, this is what's going to happen, right? It's a very, very interesting piece. For me, my family has forms of addiction. I had eating disorders, and it wasn't until I took a medication, very similar to Adderall, but it was called Vyvanse. Medications like those, so amphetamines, turn on the prefrontal cortex, right? So all of a sudden, my pattern when I went on that medicine was I would drive to the grocery store mindlessly, and there was no consequence. I would just go and get what I needed, binge, and do my thing. When I started to take Vyvanse, I'd get in the car, go to perform the routine, then all of a sudden be like, what am I doing? Like, I know this doesn't actually make me feel good. Yeah, it was incredible. It was incredible. That medication absolutely, absolutely changed my life for sure. And I was very, very scared to come off of it, but I did eventually come off of it, and I've been off of it for 2 years. And I would say that the prefrontal cortex in me is definitely still very different from other people, but I think I did enough like talk therapy and self-recognition and whatnot to make an impact there. All that to say, it's very interesting. Some of us have a very inactive prefrontal cortex, and if you're prone to sugar cravings, building awareness around that is another way that you can empower yourself, right? I know I'm prone to sugar cravings, so I need to be that much more on top of my blood sugar, because if I go into a hypoglycemic episode, I'm most likely going to reach for more sugar, or most likely going to reach for sugar. And not for nothing, it's a pretty smart move if in fact your blood sugar is low, like, not intuitively, but intrinsically, like the body is just give me more sugar, right? But if we want to break the cycle, we need to incorporate other things. That was very long-winded. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, let's talk about it. Your heart and blood sugar. So the number one killer for women is heart disease. Women's hearts are more susceptible to damage due to high blood sugar than men. So a man can have higher blood sugar levels for a consistent period of time than a woman before he'll have any signs of heart disease. Obviously, sorry about that. Obviously, there are outliers, but in general, our hearts just are more susceptible to damage. And we actually don't have to have insane levels, right? They can just be high enough, for more like frequently enough, and we will tend to develop heart disease. What's happening there is the elevated blood sugar levels are damaging the blood vessels that carry blood to and from the heart. So they're literally just wearing down the blood vessels that are bringing blood to and from the heart. Okay, that's what high blood sugar is going to do to our hearts. So again, even more reason, let's manage our blood sugar. There's the hormone piece, but also there's this long-term, 50 is not that far down the road. I feel like 50 is where you start to hear women starting to have some heart issues. So that's like not that long away, right? So staying on top of it now. High blood sugar is also associated with high blood pressure, abnormal cholesterol levels, and the tendency to be overweight. Those three things are also like independently linked to cardiovascular disease. So it's kind of just I feel like they're all connected. They're all very, very much connected. Okay. Here's the fun stuff. Yep. You're going to want to either screenshot, save the PDF, put it on your fridge, something of the sort, right? Try to incorporate these things for at least, I would say, give it a trial for this next week. And then I'm almost guaranteeing that you're going to feel a difference. If you're very far from this, you're going to feel a difference. Keep it going, right? Just keep incorporating these practices. So ways to manage your blood sugar. If we start at the first meal of the day, start off with 8 ounces at least of water. A couple lectures ago, we talked about how to limit your exposure to endocrine disruptors, filter your water. So preferably filter your water. If you can't, so be it, but filter it. If you are not a big lover of just plain water, or you feel like you're waking up a little dehydrated, go ahead, add a little bit of lime, maybe a little bit of lemon, either or, and a little bit of sea salt, okay? When you do add the sea salt, it should probably be almost taste like you shouldn't really be able to taste it. Don't make it too salty, okay? Elisa recommends eating breakfast within 90 minutes of waking. And I would like to leave that window a little bit more open than that. I think you ultimately have to listen to your body. Now, if you are completely out of regulation, I would say stick to this for at least a little bit until you start to identify or are more in touch with how you feel post-meal, before meals, where your hunger cues are at, what's going on for you, right? That's if you are completely feeling a bit like a mess. If you feel somewhat, put together, you feel fairly confident that your eating is going well, and you know that you don't feel hungry, in the first 90 minutes of waking up, then don't eat. Okay. Does that make sense? Again, for example, I wake up somewhere between 4:30, 5:30. I have mud water with protein powder. I would not consider that a meal, although it does have, I think, like maybe a total of somewhere around 200 calories and 31 grams of protein. So it's kind of wild that I don't consider that a meal, but it's not food, right? So I don't consider it a meal. I still, like, I'll work out and then sometimes I eat right after the workout, but oftentimes I don't. But again, I'm just listening to my body. Am I starving after the workout? If not, I don't eat for a little bit, and that's fine, right? So to each their own. But the important piece is make sure it's protein heavy. Make sure you've got a lot of protein in there. We want a minimum of 25 grams of protein in our breakfast. I say go closer to 45 or 50, honestly, which, yeah, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. But I would say get that first meal as protein forward, as protein rich as you possibly can. Okay. Another thing that I don't, some days I stick to, sometimes I don't. Elisa recommends limiting caffeine before food, and that would be due to any spikes in cortisol that could happen from caffeine, because that can happen. There are different chromosomes that affect how we break down caffeine. Some of us are fast metabolizers, some of us are not. If you're not a fast metabolizer, then you would probably honestly feel better if you didn't have caffeine on an empty stomach. It did take me 36 years to go down the daunting path of trying decaf in the morning, and I actually find that I feel much better. That being said, this week I've had regular coffee every morning before teaching. So, we, again, empowered choices. Here's the important piece. If you're a slow burner, you're going to want 30 grams or less of carbohydrates at breakfast. If you're a fast burner, you're going to aim for 50. Here's another piece. I probably never get 30 grams of 30 grams of carbohydrates at breakfast. Again, I'm super sensitive to carbohydrates. I have maybe 5 strawberries. I maybe have 20 blueberries. Very rarely do I have, oh my goodness, she's killing me. Her bark is so sharp. Hey, can you stop? Come here, Penny. I'm going to close my door. Sorry. You're locked out. She scares me when she barks. She does. Okay, so yeah, I usually do not have many carbs in the morning. I can't think off the top of my head. I had 5 strawberries this morning, and I think that's it's such a minimal amount. All this to say that, let's see, 5 strawberries has 7 grams of carbohydrates. So yeah, that's definitely not a lot of carbs, but that's how I feel really good. I choose to put a little bit more. I almost swap lunch and breakfast, and that currently seems to be working for me. I feel really stable. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Okay. Just keep in mind, slow burner, you would not want more than 30 grams, whether that's going to be here at breakfast or at lunch, and fast burners, somewhere around 50. Okay, let's move on to the second meal. This should be biggest meal of the day. Elisa suggests having that be right in the middle of the day. Again, take it all with a grain of salt. Feel into it for yourself. Okay. Ideally, this second meal is about 3.5 hours after your first meal. Again, she suggests that this is your biggest. You're going to limit yourself to 1 complex carbohydrate source. We'll talk about complex carbs here in a moment. You're also going to want 1 fat source. This being the biggest meal, there's a suggestion to incorporate a digestive enzyme. If you say incorporated that, you'd have it with your biggest meal. If you felt very different after incorporating that digestive enzyme, you may want to consider incorporating it into your other meals as well. Digestive enzymes literally just help your body absorb the nutrients in the meal. If you are having any elimination issues, if you're having any gut issues at all, there could be a chance that you are having difficulty absorbing nutrients. So it is just a little nutritional supplement that can help you to better absorb the nutrients that you are consuming. After lunch, 2.5 to 3 hours later would be a time to incorporate a snack or a midday bite. And again, Elisa's philosophy is like that we don't want to go into a fasted state. That's her philosophy. She's not recommending snacking all day by any means, but she's, in order to keep our blood sugar stable and as close to stasis as possible, a snack might help. Does not mean you have to have it. If you're feeling totally fine, you might not need it. But we do want to make sure it's nutrient dense. We don't want to be just reaching for crackers because that would just be a carb source, right? And so here's a suggestion of smoked oysters with sprouted crackers. Again, you want to make sure that that's a complex carbohydrate, that it's not a simple carbohydrate. A difference, let's talk about that in a second. You could also just do protein, right? So just rolled up deli meat, fruit and peanut butter. So a serving or half a serving even of peanut butter, like a tablespoon, plus an apple or a banana. And then a really yummy sounding snack would be something like goji berries and any type of nuts, okay? When it comes to, say you are somebody who exercises in the afternoon or even midday, right? And you need to fuel yourself before that workout, that might be a time that you would want more of a simple carbohydrate, okay? It all depends on your activity. It really does. And your response to carbohydrates, how you feel after you fuel yourself with carbohydrates. Yeah, and I would say like fruit is pretty quickly digested. So it is not a simple carbohydrate because it's got fiber, but it definitely does affect your blood sugar quicker. Okay, so that's something to consider as well. The last piece here would be dinner, and you're going to want to have that about 2.5 to 3 hours after your snack. Okay. She suggests that this is just a protein and a veggie, and that could be a vegetarian source of a protein as well. But she suggests avoiding grains and sugars at this time, simply because if the glucose from those foods is not utilized, it would be stored as fat. It would most likely be stored as fat. I would argue that if you are active, and again, there are so many different levels of activity, but say you are training for a race, and so you've got your trail runs, your road runs, and you're also doing cross training in gym, and you're working out training 5 days a week. I would guarantee that if you had a carb source at dinner, that it might actually refill your glycogen stores so that your training session tomorrow could be kick-ass, right? So take it all with a grain of salt. Part of this program is sharing Elisa's studies, because I think it's just so phenomenal, everything that she has found. But it would be wrong to not impart some of my own experience, and knowing that every woman has a different experience. And this isn't like a matter of fact. It's a good, solid guide. Work with it. And I would say the biggest takeaway here is slow burners, 30 grams of carbs, no more than, and then fast burners around 50. Okay. Again, if you are training for something and you are at dinner and you're like, I really want some rice, I really want some potato, go for it. Be mindful of your serving size. We'll look at that. But yeah, okay. If your body is telling you to have it, then have it. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that as an active individual at dinner. This one on the right, let's look at this first. Okay, so part of the reason we have mismanaged blood sugar is because we overconsume. It's so easy, right? It's so easy. When I look at these serving sizes, I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? 1.25 cups of carrots is a serving of carbohydrates. I can basically have a cup of sweet potato, which would give me 30 grams of carbohydrates for a meal. That's not a lot. It's just not. One small apple, I could have 2 apples if I wanted to for that 30 gram, for that 30 gram meal. So it's just, you can find sources like this all over the internet. I find these visuals to be super, super helpful. And as do I find like actually measuring what I'm consuming, right? So instead of eyeballing half a cup of peas, taking out a measuring cup and actually measuring half a cup of peas, do I want to do that for the rest of my life? No. But I find that like if I do it for 2 weeks, I can eyeball it successfully for a set amount of time. And then I'll check in with myself and I'll pull out the measuring cup and I'll be like, oh, wow, look at that. You're over serving yourself again. Okay. Just keeping it real with yourself. That's the important piece. Okay. Tortillas, I will say, are like those things, those little babies, they pack a punch. They always have so many calories and carbohydrates. They're sneaky. I only say that because I've tried like hiking with like a peanut butter and jelly tortilla roll up, and I'll bonk after eating something like that. And I'm like, how am I bonking? That thing had so many calories, but it's the carbs plus the sugar from the jelly. But when I didn't know better, like that fuel source just doesn't work well for me. I would be better off just doing half a tortilla with 2 tablespoons of peanut butter and calling it a day. Like that's my carb, that's my fat. I would ideally probably like to somehow sneak in some protein there because peanut butter doesn't really have a ton, but yeah. Okay, sources of complex carbs. They're kind of on both pages here, but I think for the most part, we know what complex carbs are. If it didn't come in a box, you're probably pretty good, right? And so oatmeal can be confusing because that definitely comes in a box. So I would say a simple, like a type of oatmeal to avoid would be like the highly sweetened maple and brown sugar or apple cinnamon, right? Just go for your plain oatmeal. If you want to add fruit to it, that's fine. Okay. And then I pulled this specifically for you. This is, let's move this over to the side. This is a vegan muscle building food pyramid. I thought this was so fun. So these would be, I'm sure you incorporate all of these foods, but just like our old school food pyramid, items at the top you want to limit. Doesn't mean avoid, but you consume those a little less. And then the pieces at the bottom are the ones that you're going to want to consume more. Now, what if you're a slow burner, right? That bottom row is all complex carbohydrates. The second row is heavily complex carbohydrates. The next one up is also complex. The only one that's not is the top, right? So I think that's an interesting task. I think that's an interesting puzzle to navigate. If you're a slow burner, how do you follow a vegan or a vegetarian lifestyle and not overdo it in terms of the carbohydrates? And then how do you not, like, I believe tofu also has quite a bit of carbohydrate, right? So like I could be wrong about that. I'm not super familiar with tofu, but yeah. Do you just eat more greens and then still stay like pretty mindful of the carbohydrates? If you're not experiencing any issues with your blood sugar, which again is kind of hard to believe because we almost all do, right? But like, what's the experimentation for somebody who's vegan or vegetarian? If all of a sudden you've been told stick to around 30 grams of protein, 30 grams of carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates at breakfast, and then only one carb source at lunch. Right. So again, take it all with a grain of salt. It's not a perfect system. We ultimately have to make it work for ourselves, right? That's the bottom line. We have to make it work for ourselves. Yeah, I feel like there was one other piece in here that I wanted to speak on, and it might come to me, but in general, our goal is to manage our blood sugar well enough so that our pancreas is producing just enough insulin to move the glucose into the cells where it needs to be. We don't want there to be excess glucose. Sorry, did I say glucose earlier? I meant insulin. I think I said insulin. We don't want there to be excess insulin because that's going to pull more glucose into the cells and again cause that drop, right? Long-term hypoglycemia is just as bad as long-term high blood sugar. Okay. Okay, at this point, I'm wrapping up. Oh, I think we have a homework slide actually. Yes. Okay, homework slide. So for next week or in the next week, pay attention to how you feel as a result of how you're currently fueling yourself. If you were inspired by this discussion to make changes right away, feel free to go ahead and do so, but like really take note. Use this time as an experiment of like, okay, I started to incorporate 8 ounces of water every single morning and I feel better. Or no, now I'm just peeing all day. Like, you know, what are the effects of any changes that you make to your diet? If you don't make any changes, notice how you feel. Are you hangry? Are you moody? Are you irritable? Are you not eating for like 6 hours throughout the middle of the day, right? Another takeaway from Elisa is she wants you eating essentially at a maximum of every 3 hours for the day, right? So if you're going 6 hours, there's a likelihood that something is happening with your blood sugar, right? But basically, you know, just keep building that awareness. That's your homework for this week. Build your awareness around your blood sugar levels, your timing of meals, the pairing of foods within your meals. It's also been suggested to, you know, this is from another researcher, but to always have a protein, fat, and fiber at each meal. And sometimes when I think of fiber, I just think of complex carbohydrates, but also the timing of carbs. So carbs should be coming either with protein or should be eaten after. So like say you get your plate, if you eat your protein first and then your carb source, that affects your blood sugar based on how they enter the system. So yeah, even playing around with that, like what if you ate all of your protein first, your source of protein, and then went to the complex carbohydrate and the veggies, right? How does that impact you? How does that make you feel? Does it shift things? Okay. Another helpful thing is also eating magnesium-rich foods, which we can easily do a Google search of what magnesium-rich foods are, but they're essentially dark leafy greens. So consumption of those can also help tremendously in regulation of your blood sugar. Okay. All right. For those that are watching at home, reach out if you have any questions. Next week's topic is your adrenals. I'm very excited about this one because I'm hoping to learn even a little bit more about how best to support my adrenals, because I know I definitely work them for sure. It's a battle. I was doing really well with limited caffeine and then I kind of like crept back into it. But yeah, anyways, that's next week's topic. If you have any questions about this week, please reach out, and otherwise we will see you soon. All right, girl. Hi.
Hello. That was really good.
Yeah. Well,
wow. Couple of notes that I have was I definitely checked off every box on the slow burner. Like there wasn't one that wasn't checked off. There was some in the fast burner that was like, oh yeah, there's that, but it was definitely 100% slow, which it kind of makes sense to me. And also thinking that must make sense with my endurance running, why I don't really bonk. Like I'm pretty steady.
Things are staying in your system longer.
Yeah. Like when I did my 100-miler, but last fall, I really didn't have a problem other than wanting to sleep. So, but
and what was your primary fuel source during that?
Oh my gosh, no. So I do the Spring Energy, which is rice and fruit. And I was doing whole, like real food. Like they had pancakes. They had it was lentil soup. That did not work for me. It was the weirdest things were good and other things weren't good. That's so weird. I really can't remember what I ate.
That's fine. So I paced an ex-boyfriend through three of his 100-milers. And I remember so fondly the food, but right now I can't think of it. Yeah. Because in that moment, you're like, wow, this is like life-saving.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing speaking of pancakes and oatmeal, after I eat that, like you would think it would be, fill me up with not even like 20 minutes and I'm starving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I noticed that doesn't work for me, which kind of stinks because it's good for backpacker type things. My boyfriend, that's what he eats.
So this is the interesting like experience for me is that I've bonked when I've had oatmeal prior to a hike. Those are the only times I've bonked.
Using oatmeal or on a hike?
I had oatmeal prior to starting the hike. I've even done oatmeal with like protein powder in it. But it's at the 2 times that I've bonked, I had oatmeal for breakfast that morning.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm at like, I just did 10 miles this weekend and I had the protein mud water thing and then 2 hard-boiled eggs and I was fine. Energy was great, like absolutely perfect. I guarantee if I had had oatmeal, I would have been ravenous by like, yeah.
I made the mistake of going out for a marathon, just like my own, like just a marathon distance of run, and had like, oh, pancakes would be great. It was actually awful. My stomach didn't do well, like nothing did well. So I just eliminate both of those things from my diet period because it just doesn't work.
I mean, I grew up, it was like a special treat to have pancakes. And so like still to this day, it's like I tell myself if it snows, the first snow of the season, I can have pancakes. And like that's my one, like really, that's like the one day that I'll go ahead and enjoy pancakes because I know that like I'm probably not going to feel that great. It's like a nostalgic thing that like I do want them, I enjoy them, but it just like I just tank. And it's not like I'm eating a ton of them. It's literally, I think it's just this like plethora of carbohydrates with real maple syrup, whether it was fake or not, like doesn't matter, but like it just I tank. Yeah.
I'm excited for the pairing and timing thing. I'm really excited to try that. Oh, and I got a cookbook called Running on Plants.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that will this actually kind of ties really well in, so I can kind of use that to. For sure. Right. Yeah. And I eat eggs. So that's usually what I have for breakfast. So.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. I need to do a little bit more research on like, how does somebody who follows a plant-based diet stay within, if you're a slow burner, how do you stay within like these parameters of like limited carbohydrate consumption? Because even like think of this too, like I believe the recommend, like this is I should look this up. I believe on average it's recommended that you have around like 150 grams of carbohydrates a day. Like you want to manipulate from there, just, go for it. But I think for like just scientific recommendation is somewhere around 150. If she's recommending slow burners only have 30 at breakfast, and then your lunch source is supposed to be only 1 complex carbohydrate, it doesn't say how many carbs you're supposed to have at that point, but does that mean you're having like 120? Yeah. At lunch? And if you are a slow burner, wouldn't 120 at lunch tank you? Right. Right. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And I run in the morning on an empty stomach. Like I don't, I have water and then I'll bring like a Spring Energy just in case I get hungry mid-run or something. But I perform best on an empty stomach. Me and my workouts in the mornings, that's what I do. Yeah.
If I had anything in my stomach, I'd be like, ugh.
Yeah. Even the mud water doesn't affect you? Having that? Yeah. Maybe I'll.
That definitely does not affect me.
Yeah.
Because there have been a couple mornings where I didn't wake up quite as I usually like to have like an hour and a half before I teach, just to like get my brain on. And there have been a couple mornings where I had it like a half hour prior to teaching and I was totally fine. Yeah. That's always been the case for me. Like if I'm starving, but I know like my training session is coming, I'll just do protein powder with water. And I think honestly what it's doing is quieting down ghrelin. I think that's honestly what it is for me.
Okay.
More than, because it's like, again, it's not real food.
Right.
Yeah. And in the morning, I'm not feeling hungry. I don't think I'm getting a ghrelin response, but that pre-workout, like if I was hungry, I feel like that's what that's about for me anyways. Yeah. Hello.
Macduff.
Macduff. Cutie. Awesome.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Next week will be very insightful as well. And then the week after that, organs of elimination. And then we'll kind of go, after that, we'll be going more into detail of like, okay, like how are we truly applying this to life? We've now like discussed these topics week by week. How are we implementing them? What have we found? Are we seeing any changes, any improvements, that kind of stuff? So
I'm also going to be journaling during my cycle because it's during my bleed because that's coming up very soon. So
yeah,
I missed it last time because I was kind of like mid it and it just wasn't in my head yet. And now I've rolled it around enough that Macduff, how rude. That I'm excited to do the journaling. So
it's super, super helpful, very insightful. There's been a lot coming up for me. So all right, girl. I hope you have a beautiful night. Get some rest.
You too.
Thank you. And we'll see each other next week. I think Wednesday. Let me feel that one out, but I'm pretty sure it'll be Wednesday. That's on my calendar.
Yeah. This time of evening, it really any day works for me. So
okay, awesome. Have a good night.
you too.
Bye.